Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 7, Stalin's Rise to Power and Stalin's Tear. And at the start of this chapter, it'd be good to review. I don't know what we're talking about, so I'm not sure it's review. But go over and digest the concept of what a radical totalitarian dictatorships means. By the way, this is not limited, of course, to dictatorships on the left, like in the example of a communist or Bolshevik dictatorship or some form of socialist. It can also happen, of course, on the right. Fascism and Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo in Japan will all be example of rightward dictatorships. But both the left and the right, these dictatorships fall under the general description of a totalitarian state. That's a term we used in previous lectures. You guys are also reading about that in Rick's Churchill and Orwell. And both Churchill and Orwell, both sorry about that, both being worried about totalitarianism. Okay, sorry about that. I think I'm done rummaging around on my desk. Okay, so what exactly is totalitarianism? And typically a totalitarian state, either left or right, left, of course, being typically communist, or on the right would be fascist. Both of these states have certain general things in common. And these are important. You guys want to know these. So take a minute there, get your pen, pencil, with your drink, of course. I got mine ready to go too. I got water here with a little lime in there. So get your drink, your beverage of choice, and get comfortable. So both institutions, all institutions and classes are subordinate to the state. So no other distinction you may have, no group distinction, no belief system, nothing about you individually or as a group is as important as a state that defines you. In fact, really the individual disappears as a small cog into a larger machine of a totalitarian state. Power in this new totalitarian state resides typically and ultimately in the hands of a powerful quasi-messianic leader, a leader who in many ways has the aura of a human/divine messiah. Now, again, they might not describe themselves with that word because that's religious imagery, and usually both left and right, they're a little bit nervous about evoking too much religious. The left, as you know, is atheistic in the first place. The right typically is not atheistic, by the way. The right oftentimes, to some degree or another, embraces a state version of the religion that they can control, of course, naturally, so they can control it. But so they might not use that language, but in reality, the all-powerful leader, whether that be a Stalin in Russia or a Hitler in Germany, for example, they're given nearly divine level of respect and deference and subordination to them. Beneath that all-powerful leader is this tight, strong, tightly disciplined party that is directed at the behest of the dictator. The party, usually one party by a one-party state, the party will move rapidly to crush and eliminate any opposition to its policies or existence. Certainly the individual leader would do that, but the party in general would do that. So any kind of opposition, left or right, again, doesn't really matter in a sense. Any kind of opposition is rapidly crushed. Think in Germany, the Gestapo knock on the door, come to take you away, the men with dark leather coats. In Russia, the Cheka, or later the NKVD coming to take away someone during Stalin's purges, etc. The party will dominate the use of media to exercise complete political control. That means in that time period, of course, that'd be the radio, all kinds of print media, newspapers, books, literature of any kind of public expression of any form is controlled by the party. Any contrary view, of course, is eliminated. Totalitarian states are anti-liberal form of government by definition, right? Anti-liberal means focus on individual rights. In a totalitarian society, you don't have individual rights of religion or expression or assembly, a voice, a speech, any of those. You don't have those, right? So all those are only useful as they align with the absolute party of the state. Totalitarian states tend to mobilize society towards some great goal, oftentimes to expansion or strengthening or some larger mystical goal. Could be towards some kind of utopia, either for the nation or for the larger world. In the case of fascism, it's usually more of a state utopia. The our state will dominate because our culture is the best. Think again, the Nazis, the fascist philosophy, Hitler's, the greater Germany that dominates most of the globe, and German society can then flourish and get to the height of its human development because Germany is the best. In the case of leftist movements like communism, Marxism, they're looking for a communist utopia that sweeps the whole world, but in the short run, strengthen the nation into a communist utopia. And so any sacrifice for the greater good, no matter how painful, is required for, again, this great goal that we're all reaching toward. Totalitarian states have an always advancing revolution, a great goal which requires ever more sacrifice and effort to achieve. You especially see this in the leftist totalitarian states, communism. The fascist ones, I think they would employ this too, but they weren't around long enough to, fortunately, thank God, they weren't around long enough to have a lot of time to advance this. So Germany and Italy and fascist Japan did not have probably the time they would have liked to maybe implement these things. But certainly in communist states, which lasted longer, there's this ever-advancing goal that requires sacrifice. And we're talking currently right now, if you're in North Korea, you better believe the dear leader is telling his people, I know it's hard for you, we're having another food shortage again, but it's taken us, despite the sacrifices and the pain, it's taken us ever closer to that glorious future of the communist utopia, the triumph of communist North Korean dear leaders' thought. In North Korea, and probably expanding onto the world, again, as a quasi-messianic leader, of course. All right. Now let's get to the Soviet Union, and I have some sources to recommend to you guys on Stalin. Stalin is a fascinating and terrible figure in human history. One of the world's great dictators, and when I say great, I by no means mean good, as you guys know quite well. Stalin was exceptionally capable as a dictator, but with extraordinary, bloody, costly consequences for millions upon millions of Russians, both in Russia and Eastern Europe and beyond. So the cost of his success has been extraordinary. He's one of the great killers of human history, just to not to put too fine a point on it. There's some books to recommend to you guys. I know you guys are busy right now, but I don't have time for these, but still. Young Stalin by Simon Montefiore would be a good choice. Stalin, the Court of the Red Tsar, also be quite good. He's going into more Stalin, the person, the individual, his personal relationships, what he's like as an individual. Both of those would be good choices. Robert Service's Stalin. Robert Service is one of the great historians. He's passed away now, but no. Yes, he has. He has passed away a few years back. But a great historian. And then more recently, the most recent of these, and by the most exhaustive by far, would be Stephen Kotkin's 3-volume biography of Stalin. The first volume you see in front of you, and I have right here. His second volume, Waiting for Hitler, 1929-1941. And his third volume, which I believe has not been published yet, he's still finishing that up. So I assume anytime now that will come out. You might not have time and space for all 3 volumes of Stephen Kotkin's magnum opus on Stalin. Some of these other books might work better for you, but they would all be great choices. All right, let's talk about Stalin here a minute. Now, of course, as you know, Stalin is moving in the shadow, of course, of Lenin and to some degree Trotsky, who is Lenin certainly is number 1. Trotsky probably considered number 2. Joseph Stalin lurking in the wings, but not far in the wings. He'd probably be number 3 in this. You can see his emergence as the ultimate survival out of the 3, and carries on the torch of the Bolshevik Revolution, and then ultimately into what we could say called Stalinism. So it's important for us to slow down and spend time on this man, and what a case study in power climbing, ambition, ruthlessness, personality, lack of a moral center, and the extraordinary lengths he goes to complete his vision, the paranoia that accompanies that, and the extraordinary loss of life that accompanies all of that. So there's Joseph Stalin. He was born in 1879, and he would. Okay, by the way, he did not die in 1904. The world would have been better if he would have, but he did not. He died in 1953. I divided up my brief bio of him into sections. So when it says 1874-94, that's his early life. Maybe I should add. That's better. You guys get confused. Okay, so now he's born in Georgia. He's not technically born in what was traditional Russia. Now he would be born in part of what's considered part of the Soviet Union. But being born in Russia, he's not technically, in large scope of things, Russian, although he certainly becomes Russian. His father was an alcoholic cobbler who was very abusive to Stalin and his mother. His mother was a very devout Christian who worked as a house cleaner. Eventually, Stalin's mother and Stalin would flee the home, flee the abuse and violence, alcoholic violence of his father. His mother's vision was for Stalin to become a priest. That was her hope, being very devout herself. That is, as you guys probably know, that's not going to happen. As a young man, Stalin's quite bright and does well in school, although he frequently fought with the boys. That'll be a little foreshadow in the future. There's the young Stalin as a schoolboy there on the left. That's from 1893. He would eventually, following the initial hopes of his mother, join a seminary. That's a seminary in Tiflis in Georgia that he would join there in the middle right there. That's the seminary he joined. So he was on track for the priesthood. As you can guess, something obviously diverted him from that track. The priesthood most certainly is not what he what he evolved into. And there he is at the age of 23. By that time period, he's long gone from any vision he'd be a priest, and he's moved into Bolshevik activism. In any case, so in 1894, Stalin enrolls in the Orthodox seminary in Tbilisi. A scholarship allowed him to do that. While he's there, he begins to lose interest in religion. Instead, he announces he's an atheist, and he joins a forbidden book club that is reading a whole series of radical revolutionary authors. Ultimately leads him to Karl Marx' Das Kapital. Not surprising that comes down the road, around the pike, as you guys know, that he would obviously encounter Marxism and believes this is the wave of the future. This is social justice for him. Leaves the seminary, gets more and more involved, committed in Marxism and activism. 1901, he's elected to the Tiflis Committee of a Social Democratic Labor Party. That's a regional Marxist party. His Marxist organization efforts ultimately bring him the attention of the Tsarist secret police, the Okhrana, and he is forced into hiding. Tries to keep a low profile, but he is a very committed Marxist organizer, strikes, mass demonstration, attacking a prison to get weapons. Ultimately, that leads to his arrest and exile in Siberia in 1903. But he escapes within a year and is back to his Bolshevik Marxist activism and grows increasingly identified with Lenin's interpretation of Marxism, which is Bolshevik. By the way, he wasn't a Bolshevik yet, but as he's doing more and more reading, he realizes that the interpretation of Lenin of Marxism, which we refer to as Bolshevism, is what appeals to Stalin the most. And so he would begin to associate himself as a communist, as a Marxist, with the Bolshevik interpretation. That takes us to Stalin, 1905, 1917. So the 1905 revolution, which rocks Russia, as you guys know well, expands and it energizes his activism as a Marxist, as a Bolshevik. And he begins to get increasingly more and more involved in Bolshevik/Marxist activities. He forms what are called battle squads with like-minded Marxists who are willing to use violence and force to further their cause. That means whether that's small-scale violence, bank robbing, attack some pro-government Cossack troops or the pro-Tsarist Black Hundreds who support the Tsar's autocracy, but he's increasingly involved and does whatever it takes to further the cause of the Bolshevik cause. Violence is not a problem for him. In 1905, for the first time, Lenin does meet the young Stalin. They meet in Finland at a Bolshevik conference. Stalin also married his first wife. In that same year, Stalin's marriage to his first wife is tragically quite short. He's gone a lot of it with his continual Bolshevik activism. She will get sick and die in 1907. And some observers, some historians argue that the loss of his wife, his first wife, would be a very shattering event, and that there was a level of humanity in him and feeling that would be lost for the rest of his life following the death of his first wife. And you can see that quote there, a quote allegedly from Stalin saying, "This creature softened my heart of stone. She died, and with her died any last warm feelings for humanity." Perhaps it's more complicated than that. He will go through quite a bit of personal tragedy in his life. Not surprisingly, for the man of steel, which that's what Stalin means, and not surprisingly, based on his reputation, you guys know, to have blood of millions on his hands. His personal life with his significant others was often rough, which is probably not a huge surprise. All right. There's a painting of Stalin meeting Lenin. That's, of course, Stalin there standing up talking, and that'd be Lenin there on the right. That's a photograph of his first wife. By the way, second marriage, and you guys know from watching The Assignment, which you'll do shortly on Stalin, his second wife will commit suicide. So Stalin's marriages end in heartbreak and tragedy. The second one, his wife, certainly Stalin's behavior, Stalin's involvement in many things, no doubt, plus the fact that her own mental health struggles of that helped lead to her suicide. That not be necessarily the case of his first wife, but the fact that his marriage is in a heartbreak and tragedy, perhaps not surprising knowing Stalin's character. It's a photograph of Stalin at the funeral for his first wife. You see Stalin with his disheveled, messy hair on the right there and grief at the loss of his quite young wife. She did bear a child with him, but as you see, the marriage is quite short, around 2 years before she died. Following the death of his wife, he returns to Bolshevik activism. I should return. He was already involved. Even when he was married, he wasn't around very much with his first wife because he's so busy with the Bolshevik movement. But he throws himself back into it, of course. He's subsequently shortly arrested and briefly exiled several times, all of which he either escapes or gets out relatively quickly. His exiles are all pretty quick. In 1912, Stalin was elected to the Bolshevik Central Committee. Why that's important is that's really the Bolshevik leadership, and also becomes editor of Pravda, which is the party organ or mouthpiece of the Bolshevik Party. That's important. Make sure you guys on that book, because that's really Stalin bringing himself to a place of significance and power. Both those to be on the Bolshevik Central Committee, which is really the leadership committee. And of course, Lenin's ahead of that, right? But the fact that this small elite corps is in it and Stalin's one of them means it puts him in the cockpit quite early on. Additionally, the fact he's editing Pravda, again, that's the newspaper of the Bolshevik Party, gives you a role of the confidence Lenin has in him. Stalin's talent to be able to edit this, and also responsibility given him to do this. More arrests, more exile is followed. His physical disability keeps him out of World War I. His arm is crippled, so he's not involved in the World War I directly. That on the left is 1911 Tsarist or Okhrana secret police mugshot there of Stalin. And on the right there is the first issue of Pravda, which will be edited by Stalin. Excuse me, it's been a busy day. So following the February Revolution, Stalin was able to return to Petrograd, where Lenin was, and resume his work on Pravda and begin assisting Lenin more directly. Stalin continues involved in the Central Committee and his work on Pravda, and under Lenin's leadership helps plan the coup that brings Lenin and the Bolsheviks to power. So later on, there's been controversy in Stalin's critics would argue that he'd had no major role in the early part of the Bolshevik Revolution. That's not true. Now, it also is true you don't want to exaggerate his role. He is in the leadership circle, but of course, it's not just him. Lenin, of course, is number one, but you have other very prominent revolutionaries who are there as well. So Stalin is in the elite club of leadership, but he's one of a number. So it's not just him below Lenin, which should give you later in life, that would be the image. But that's not correct. It's more complicated than that. He's in this elite club, but he's one of a significant number of other core individuals. But he doesn't have an important role. He emerges as an important inner member of that core leadership within the Bolshevik Party. Lenin, of course, is number one. Trotsky is probably certainly by his well-known reputation would be number two, and there's other prominent revolutionaries as well. But Lenin would be in the top, I don't know what you'd pick, the top 6 or 7, whatever number you want to come up with. Stalin. Stalin would be in that top core group, among others. All right, Stalin from 1918 to 1921. So the Civil War, as you guys know, breaks out. The whites fight against the Russian Revolution. We talked about that with the previous lecture. It's a very bloody war as the Bolsheviks are trying to crush the whites. Also, as you guys know, they'll end up fighting against Poland, and they'll be fighting in Ukraine, as you guys know quite well. Stalin in that time period is given military command and also political command, which he does quite well. He also is sent to enforce the Bolshevik Party's control of area. Stalin has no problem whatsoever using mass violence and terror to achieve his objectives, and does. So much so that even some of the Bolsheviks at the time stood back from him and thought perhaps he had gone too far. Despite all that, despite his, I guess, from a Bolshevik standpoint, quite capable and quite accomplished role in the Russian Civil War, he's nowhere near the same level of public awareness for the typical Russian on the street that, say, Trotsky has. And that's Trotsky there standing on top of an armored train. So Trotsky, at least in the eyes, probably the typical Bolshevik and the typical Russian, is clearly number two right below Lenin. Stalin may or may not be publicly part of your idea of the apparatus or the control leadership of the Bolshevik Party. Well, Stalin is there, as I mentioned. Sometimes behind the scenes, he's not particularly prominent. For example, Stalin is not a brilliant public speaker. Don't hold your breath going onto YouTube and finding a dynamic, riveting speech by Stalin. That is not his strength. He has had many strengths. We'll get to that shortly. But a dynamic, powerful, magnetic presence in speaking to large crowds, that is not his skill set. He does not do it because he's not good at it. Now, he's very good at other things. But the star on the stage, which Trotsky definitely can do, because Trotsky was a very good public speaker. Stalin does not have that skill set, so at this time he's not as prominent as Trotsky's going to be. There's Lenin, there's Stalin wearing his uniform from this era. So as you mentioned, for the case of our class right now is not so important, but he's another Bolshevik leader. I'm going to make this video not too long. I do want to get to this next little section on the strengths of Stalin. This is according to Stalin specialist historian Stephen Kotkin on how to recommend it. By the way, I mentioned this in previous videos. I highly recommend you guys, if you have some free time, I know you guys are busy with work, but YouTube is a wonderful way for you guys to enter into the larger world of getting access to these brilliant other historians. So I do my very best, as you guys know, to bring this to you guys, but I cannot begin to compete, of course, with these specialists. I just recommend going to YouTube and put in Stephen Kotkin. So if you want to get a deeper view of Stalin, Stalin's views of the world, Stalin lead up to World War II, any of these, Stephen Kotkin would be a great choice. Of course, by the way, you don't have to jump to Stephen Kotkin. You could back up and choose Robert Service. You could also certainly choose Simon Montefiore, Google their name and Stalin, and you get some excellent videos. The homework you guys are working on right now, by the way, the video you guys are watching on Stalin and the Great Purges, Simon Montefiore, who's author of these two books right here, appears frequently in that documentary I've assigned to you guys. So you might not be aware of who that is, but that's who that is. In any case, let's get to Stephen Kotkin's summation of what makes Stalin, in many ways, so terrifyingly so successful as a dictator. And here's what Kotkin argues: that Stalin benefited from favorable circumstances, the Russian Revolution, obviously, the Bolshevik Revolution, Lenin's early death, because Lenin's going to die quite young. Lenin probably could have lived, if he would have had probably a normal longevity, at least 7 more decades, but that's not what takes place. Lenin, not long after the Bolshevik Revolution, his health begins to rapidly go down and dies in the early 20s. And so that leaves a power vacuum that opens the door for someone, in this case, Stalin, to come through that open door and assert his own ambitions. Additionally, you have the broad appeal of communism in many parts of the world. Again, this is the ideal, the utopian appeal of communism. At that time period, not seeing what's going to really turn out to. It does have a broad appeal, and so Stalin is venerated in many places. Communism itself is, and Stalin appears to be the leading proponent of it, which he will be shortly. It also empowers him. He's able to tap into that natural appeal that communism has for many of the poor of the worker, poor of the world, the colonized in the world, the marginalized, the oppressed, etc., who communism tends to have a major appeal toward them. Stalin is clearly extremely ambitious. Not surprisingly, you're not going to get to the position he is. He's extremely ambitious, and he is. He's very ambitious. He's also a highly effective organizer. He's very good at this. I mentioned he's not a good public speaker. That's not he's not a particularly great writer, although he's talented. That's why he's an improviser, right? So he does have some skills to write. But I would not call him a brilliant writer. I think no one would call him a leading Marxist intellectual. Not that he's not intelligent, he is, but he's not a brilliant intellectual. But he is a very good organizer. He knows how systems work. He knows how to use the hierarchy of his system to outmaneuver his opponents and to tap into the power of this structure and not allow anything to distract him from the power that institution has enabled him to have. Kotkin also mentions that Stalin is very focused. He's a very hard worker. Probably, frankly, in our modern parlance, he'd be a workaholic. He could work long days. He could micromanage things. He did not have a lot of other personal interests that distracted him from what he wanted to do. For example, women and alcohol. He might enjoy both of those, but neither one of those is he allowed to distract from his ambition, his workload, etc., for what he believes needs to happen yet. His first wife, as you found that out, because oftentimes he was not even around. Even when she was sick, he visited her, but was not there when she died, because he's out doing his Bolshevik activism. We have that with family in general. So he doesn't allow anything to, any kind of perhaps even traditional human pleasure or distractions to distract him from what he thinks he needs to do. Clearly, Stalin had very strong willpower, unquestionably willpower. He would not survive all these power struggles, the danger of his position, the crisis, the responsibility, all the challenges faced in Bolshevik Russia, Russia in World War II, etc. If you don't have a tremendous willpower to continue on with his personal vision of what he wants to do. Certainly, he's ruthless. That's no surprise to any of us. He's willing to do whatever is necessary. Does not seem to be bothered by the violence he employs, even in massive numbers. We know in The Purge, which we'll get to in the following lecture to this one, because it's a two-parter, he personally signs his name, the death list, his NKVD death list during the Purge for tens of thousands. And he signs off on tens of thousands of names. Now, he's author of even more into the hundreds of thousands. But he personally signs off of tens of thousands of individuals and appears, at least from our general observation of him, to have lost little sleep on that issue. Now, that's a very complicated psychological examination, so we don't want to say too easily he's a psychopath or he had no second thoughts or his conscience bothering all these killings. But I would say we don't have a recording of that he struggles with it. So perhaps that is a bit of psychopathic behavior, that we don't have any record of him struggling with this and wondering the extraordinary death toll in his hands, if that bothered him. We appear not to have that. So his willingness to use violence to manipulate others, which he's very good at, it's one reason why he's able to maneuver his way to power, is his ability to manipulate colleagues against Trotsky or whoever. He's very good at this. He's very good at forming, almost like if you guys like Survivor on TV, he's very good at that stuff, to form like little mini alliances, secret alliances, and multiple secret alliances, not just one, and shifting alliances. So he doesn't say loyal necessarily to any of these people necessarily. As long as they're useful to him, then he's useful to them. But that alliance may shift, and they may be no longer useful, and he may cut them loose. By cut them loose, I mean have them executed, done away, exiled, imprisoned. Stalin was a true believer in communism. It seems like, from all that we know, certainly I think his ego definitely liked his own power, his own greatness, as he probably saw it. But that does not take away from him also being a true believer in communism, Marxism. That I heard Stephen Kotkin refer to this just recently, the last couple of days, that this is Stalin's effort to achieve a term you guys hear quite often these days in society, social justice. That Stalin believes in this remedy to the ills of humanity, again, in pursuit of social justice. At least communism is that route. So he's deeply committed to that. But additionally, and again, this maybe seems like it's contradictory, but Kotkin argues it's not. But Stalin was also a statist. By statist means he's also a hardcore Russian patriot. So he's quick to appeal to Russian national pride and Russian patriotism, even though, frankly, those are really separate. In fact, in an ultimate communist utopia, there is no state, there is no nation. There'd be no Russia, in a sense, in the ultimate communist utopia of the future. But Stalin simultaneously does both of these. He's both proud to be a Russian and appeals to Russian patriotism and preference of Russia above others. But he also is a believer in Marxism and communism, which really, at least in its ultimate manifestation, would be anti-state. But both of those simultaneously within Stalin help explain who Stalin is. Now, of course, I don't want to get lost, talk about Stalin's strengths. You might begin to mistake that maybe there's a hint of admiration in Stalin. Of course, there is not. Yep, we are.
Oh, we are?
Yep. About 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the end of my video, by the way. So good news for you guys. So this one's ending. So I'll just wrap it up right here. So Stalin, all those truths are true. And the reason why I mention this is because we don't want to create Stalin into just some kind of demon or imp of the devil, because we dismiss his humanity like we all have. The fact that he was fully human and had these strengths. Some of these strengths, I suppose, isolated from Stalin himself, have admirable aspects about them. He was a hard worker, etc. But employed in a dark enterprise and with the dark instincts that Stalin has, these very skill sets that make him so talented in some ways within an organization and as a leader, just magnify the darkness that's emanate out from Stalin. And again, I mentioned whether this is a technical, psychological examination, it certainly has an air of truth, is that he's a sociopath and a murderer and a killing of millions and millions and millions of people. Unnecessarily. A terrible, terrible tragedy, countless lives lost for no real reason. The utopia that he was working toward turns into a nightmare for many, for millions upon millions and millions. It's a terrible human experiment that the world tried under Stalin. And Stalinism, an experiment that had led to almost genocidal level extinction of opponents. But we're going to stop right there. You see, I have a colleague there calling me into a meeting. Good news for you guys means this lecture is coming to an end right here, and I'm going to stop. So, all right, we'll stop here with the Stalin seizes power. So, and we'll pick up with the following lecture right after this one. So, until that one, take care, everybody.